So what have we got for you today? Well, the mirror has splashed on Iran's decision yesterday to launch 182 missiles at civilian areas in Israel in response to Israel's decision to launch a limited ground attack on Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, which of course has been a proxy for the Iranian state that wants to wipe out Israel for many years. Now, Darren, this is just sort of the latest tit for tat in a conflict that frankly has been raging on without cease for the entirety of our lifetimes and before. But this is escalating now, isn't it? Iran's stopped using proxies to fight Israel. It's doing so itself. And it came too late for last night's papers, but it was confirmed overnight that the US and our own Royal Air Force were involved in shooting down some of those missiles in order to protect Israeli civilians. So there's talk of all-out war. What do you think?
Well, you've summed it up very well, and the Daily Mirror splash characterizes the situation well, because revenge is the word, and as you say, this didn't begin with the horrors, and we have to recognize those horrors of October 7. We're approaching the anniversary at the moment, but it didn't begin with that. It began way before that. But it's escalated to a point where Iran has issued that statement yesterday, and all of us were glued to the TV, weren't we? As they said that it was revenge for the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, the Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh, and basically it said that if there was to be a response from Israel, then it would be met with, in the words of the statement, a crushing further action. Now, as Chris was saying, this is a really tense moment for the world, because, and I'll be honest with you, Susie, I kind of have been hoping to hear politicians talking about de-escalation and about stopping the killing, the cycle of blood, as it were, because there has been murder on all sides. And I had been hoping to see politicians really ratchet down the rhetoric, but instead they've been talking about rights to defend and this, that, and the other. And we've got this, and if this were to happen, that were to happen. And people are quite rightly very, very concerned about the moment we found ourselves with. I wonder, Susie, if normally there is a grown-up in the room. Normally there's someone, the US has the most influence over Israel. Because there is, however, that power vacuum, Biden obviously has been replaced by Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is not yet, there's 4 weeks to go until the election. There isn't really somebody to basically, say, we've got to stop this here.
It's got to be said as well that Joe Biden, as you saw when he pulled out of Afghanistan, he's not the kind of US president that wants to go in and deal with foreign states' problems. He has said, as America has all the way along, that they'll protect Israel and all the rest of it. He sent his carrier there to help intercept some of the missiles. But he's not been the kind of president, for example, that Donald Trump was, that was just absolutely gung-ho for one side or the other, and hasn't really been engaged. So you've got that vacuum anyway. Then you have another vacuum, which is the US presidential election, which means whoever is making a decision right now is not going to be the person who's making a decision come January. And then you have the fact, of course, that the current Israeli government, which is a loose coalition involving some ultra-nationalists who do not have public support, really, in Israel itself.
And that's really important.
Well, not listening to them anyway.
No, you're right. I think it's really important for you to make that distinction, because the current Israeli government doesn't have widespread support across the country. There are lots of people, and the more this continues, the further away a diplomatic solution appears to be. Just like we've been sympathetic to the people who have had their lives torn apart in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Beirut, your hearts go out to the Israeli people. They're cowering in bomb shelters while the whole thing is playing out. Yes, it was spectacular to look at yesterday as the bombs rained down, but also terrifying as well, because at the center of this is the people. And it cannot, lots of us have friends who are over there, or who have family over there, who don't want to see this happen. So the vacuum that you talk about is so important and so terrifying, because who does step into the breach and try to broker a diplomatic solution?
Well, there's been talk of that happening, of course, and it being very close to the point of an agreement, but then one side or the other sort of sabotaging it and getting blamed for the other person did it and all the rest of it. What do you think, everybody? Do you worry that we're on the edge of all-out war? Do you think that we're sliding to some kind of abyss that there's no way out of, or do you feel a bit more optimistic about it? Leslie says we shouldn't be taking sides in the Middle East. Two wrongs have never made a right. How is this going to end? That's exactly the question, Leslie. No one knows how it's going to end, and no one can kind of see an off-ramp for anybody, really, to get out of where we are. So one of the things that being muttered about is that Israel, which since October the 7th has been very ruthless in taking out what it sees as threats to its security, quite reasonably so in some cases. But first in Gaza, which just got flattened, and the West Bank, which has been very badly oppressed. And then Hezbollah in Lebanon with the attacks on exploding walkie-talkies and pagers and so on, which took out, again, a lot of civilians as well as the people that were targeted. It's now considering, apparently, a limited series of airstrikes is being discussed on Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, Darren, that's the one thing which has changed in the course of this conflict, right? So when I was growing up, we had exactly the same footage on our TV screens of, you know, bodies and dust and cement and blitzes and things like this. But what's changed in the course of this is that we're now talking about nuclear-armed nations. Israel is believed to have nukes, although it's never confirmed that. And that's Iran's argument as to why they have had in the past some uranium enrichment facilities, although the UN and weapons inspectors and so on have tried to keep on top of that. We don't think they've got as far as warheads, but they definitely have like some nasty stuff we don't want them to start playing with. That's the real risk, isn't it? As the risk as far as Israel is concerned. They don't want Iran to start nuking it. And when you have religious fundamentalists who all think that this is their chosen route to heaven and that that's where things are going to be better, they don't have the same amount to lose, perhaps, as those of us who are in more secular nations, have more secular outlooks, who go, do you know, I'd just rather we didn't nuke everything. That's the risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think in simple terms, everyone seems to be saber rattling and showing their capability almost in an attempt to escalate rather than to de-escalate. Because, as you say, you remember years ago, decades ago, when there had been this kind of conflict, and in the intervening years, countries have built up their capability, nuclear or otherwise. Or I should say, and otherwise. So now you've got a situation where Israel is wanting to take out whatever capability Iran does have. Iran, the experts say, have yet to show their hand as far as their capability is concerned, even though we did see those 200 ballistic warheads hit, according to our colleagues at Sky News and geolocation information areas in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and elsewhere. This is not going to end well if there isn't a diplomatic solution. And I think what the Middle East going up in flames does represent for a lot of people is almost a prelude to a wider war. Because if obviously the allies of Israel get involved, then you would assume the allies of Iran get involved. And then where does that end? So
well, it ends with America and China then, doesn't it? And Russia.
Well, indeed. And it worries people. You know, I know, and you know this even more so, given the work that you've done. There is this convention, isn't there, that the Prime Minister, or there are no big interviews during the Tory party or each other's conference. So we were unlikely to see Sir Keir Starmer doing a big interview during this period. But actually, that's kind of been seen to be quite anachronistic, because right now, leadership is needed more than ever. Now, there might be some people who say, well, hang on a minute, the UK in this, they're peripheral. Because at the end of the day, the only one with influence over the Israelis is America. But at the same time, people in this country are concerned. People don't want to be drawn into another war. People want to know, okay, if it is the case that we were aiding this effort yesterday, how are we aiding it? What were we doing? Give us some detail. Give us some context. People don't want to be drawn into another war. So there are lots and lots of very anxious people around the country right now, and indeed around the world.
And of course, and if the RAF are being used, it's obviously that we're not peripheral. We're a chief ally of America. We have bases in Cyprus where the Defense Secretary John Healey is today, and we have the hardware in the area, and we also have, of course, let's not forget, an historic responsibility for what happens to Palestine pre-war. Anyone's seen Lawrence of Arabia? That is a fact-based drama, everybody. And we have some responsibilities for what's befallen that area since then. Richard says, I remember it not being all that long ago. Iran had inspectors going in to assure the United Nations, etc. They had no weapons program in full swing. Yep. And that has happened. But what we need to bear in mind is that when you have conflict like this, okay, Israel has got all the infrastructure, the kit, the equipment, and the ability to use it. It has the highly trained military, which can go and have a big offensive. Iran has got the Republican Guard and so on. It's got military, but it's just not the same. And it probably couldn't fight a one-on-one war with Israel. But what it is very good at is having these proxies, having terror cells all around the world, all around the Middle East, which could go in and do something devastating with only 3 or 4 people. And that's asymmetrical.
Given I can't remember the person who you just mentioned a second ago, but Richard. I remember there were a number of years, Richard, talking about Iran's secrecy, UN inspectors and whatnot. I remember there had been a very, very long period within which Israel were. There was a lot of debate, shall we say, an argument and over whether Iran were allowing inspectors to come in and see what their capability had been, what they had been doing. And there is this widespread perception, as you were saying quite rightly, that they don't have the ability to withstand an attack from Israel or to respond. But what do we know about their capability? Well, because they have been so secret for so long, because they have kept their cards so very close to their chest, what do we actually know about what they have within their armory?
Yeah, well, there's been talk as well recently of Putin and Ukraine also being connected with Iranian missiles and who's making missiles for whom, it's going what direction. It's just Leslie says none of them have the capability and strength to stop this. History has taught us nothing. It's a depressing point, Leslie. It probably leads us on to our next story quite well, unfortunately. It's obviously now, I suppose, Keir Starmer, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, other world leaders to decide somehow how far Israel's right to defend itself can extend and how much further we have to descend into the abyss before all these neighbours decide that they'd rather live together in peace and harmony rather than slaughter and bloodshed. We're not there yet, clearly. Hopefully we'll be before long.